So let's talk about this. This is a good segue. A lot of founders, oh man, raising funds sucks so much. I can raise money. But like, if you're a founder, there's probably hundreds of thousands of people you can go to for funds, angels, VCs, whatever. But I have to admit, it's like 100 times harder for a VC fund to raise money because the people you can raise for money has to be really, really short, right? So talk about the
Yeah.
pains and processes like a VC funds have to go through to get raise funds.
Yeah, and this is me just kind of observing, but what I've kind of observed, like learning from Nardo and everything with this fund, is that, well, I should preface this by saying that Qubits is a global fund, right? Global funds are different because, for example, Nardo and the board of Qubits Ventures. Remember, I mentioned those 40 some countries that have quantum initiatives. A lot of folks like Nardo and the board of Qubits, they've advised in some capacity on some of those initiatives, and they've worked with some of those folks in the labs and scientists. And the world of quantum is ironically very small. So the thing about it is that when they go to raise, they're subject to the terms and conditions around these sorts of investment vehicles in every single country that they might have an LP in, right? So for example, there's like a ton of interest in like India, right? And like there might be like LPs there, and but that's going to be different than the folks who might be like the LPs in France. And then of course the US has the SEC rules, right? And that's part of why like we're the venture studio and Qubits is on the raise, because regulatory says that Qubits is the fund. They're the ones who can do it. We're the studio folks. We're not authorized to. Those rules apply in some permutation all over the world. So I would say that like we're kind of navigating some of the global complexity. That said, because of that traction and awareness around not just quantum computing, but kind of these next gen solutions for data centers, sensors, all of that, that market is a lot more ready to invest in some ways than the US is. And that's besides like even just the known statistics of startups here. So Ascend and like Kirby and that great team that put together all that data, right? You go to their website, which I highly recommend, it has great startup insights. But one of the stats you see on there is that 90% of startups here in our area have to get funding from outside of this area.
But that's always been one of my pet peeves here, right? You always hear like these investors, oh, we only invest in companies that deserve funding. Well, that's true. Why, like you said, why do 90% of people get no here to get yes somewhere else, right? I never understood that.
Yeah, this gets into the thing I was talking about earlier about being kind of like accidentally anti-innovation. I'm starting to wonder, people, one explanation to what you just said, because I asked that question, being like, so new to all of this and like launching Barclay. I mean, we only launched in February on the studio side, and Fund 2 is the effort this year for Qubits from their previous fund a couple of years ago. And I was asking people that, the phrase I kept getting was risk aversion.
Yeah.
I kept getting like risk aversion.
I use like a small business banker mentality.
Yeah, and the thing is that like, and obviously risk aversion and venture,
It's not like it should be an oxymoron.
yeah, go together like like vinegar and water, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not, it's not, even if you can mix them, it's rough going down, right? Like and I get it, but I struggle to see, like,
They split up a little bit.
yeah, I struggle to see like where that's a satisfactory answer for what we say we want to see in this ecosystem, right?
So this is the best answer I got on that, right? So I had a friend in San Francisco. He's a VC. I said, can you explain your take on like the Bay Area, Seattle? He said, yeah, Jason, I have a good answer. I have no proof of this, but I think it's an answer, right? He said, in the Bay Area, all the VCs are former founders, or former startup people. In Seattle, all the angels and VCs are former Microsoft, Amazon. They never really started a company before, for the most part. He said in the Bay Area, if a startup makes it, the founder reinvests it in other startups, right? Where he said, well, I could tell in the Seattle area, if someone makes it, they take the money and go home, right? So there's really no reinvestment community here, supposedly. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no stats to back it up, but it seems true.
I could see that. I think, that does speak to kind of the risk aversion thing. I think that also kind of speaks to another kind of troubling conversation that's kind of been happening around this, which is like kind of this idea of like complacency. Like about, I heard one of my friends was just like, they're like, Sierra, think about it. How long can you have a very prosperous region anchored into like these really big companies before everyone's just fat and sassy?
Yeah, that's very true.
And even from the perspective of like, let's say like you're trying to pitch like, well, don't you want some more upside? Like, don't you want some more growth? And it's like,
yeah,
I got my Microsoft stuff, I'm good.
Yeah, or you hear the stories where like a founder pitches an angel investor, and the angel investor wants KPIs like Microsoft or Amazon, right?
Yeah, like so I do think like that, there's there's obviously a bit of a chilling effect that happens with that, and like that's where the money comes from, and people are like, no, I'm good. I will say though, from this is what I mean by accidentally anti-innovation, that becomes that as soon as you're just like, I'll give you an example. I relocated here for a role at Microsoft. I was on a team and met lots of people. They're parents like me, right? They have great benefits at Microsoft for kids and all that.
Those golden handcuffs.
Well, yeah, a little bit of that for sure. But there's very much a thing that happens. I talked to other like parents when I was at Microsoft, and like I know some of them, they're still there, and it's very much like that mentality of like, oh yeah, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. But now it's time for their kids to go to school, right? And even if like, you know, Microsoft and resource, you got to live in a great school district, and Microsoft and working in corporate here provided all that for you. Your kid and goes to get like an internship, or your kid goes to get hired, and that very same like engine that allowed you to put them on that path, they're just like, we don't have anything for you, because you're too inexperienced. So I do worry about kind of the succession plan, so to speak, and the pipeline, where it's like, for this like generation, because this is a big generational divide issue. And that's another thing I think about a lot with some of this like innovation stuff, is that, you know, you talked about the future and time horizons. You know, we were talking about some of the metaphysics of it earlier, but you know, nobody lives forever. For some people, the reason why like they don't care that like quantum whatever is going to be ready in 5 to 10 years is because like, you know, like they're going to be retired, they're going to be out of the game, they're planning on going to glory. So in that way, it's like, you know, they're kind of telegraphing like, on my timeline, this is irrelevant, right? But like for a younger generation, where like, you know, you were a part of a group where it's like all of this was awesome, but you need an innovation ecosystem. You need all that stuff to hire your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew. Then what?
Exactly. So don't tell details, but like as a VC fund, how do you decide how much money to raise? How does that work?
Well, so that decision is actually not up to us on the studio side. Because we're part of like this global strategy. So what they decide to raise is a function of what they're looking to fund for the studios, but also in terms of the direct investment in the portfolio companies, like across these like global LPs, right? So yeah, those folks get to deal with that, while we get to focus on like, let's find these companies, and moreover, let's find products, goods, and services that are worthy of a company. Because that's another thing that kind of happens in this weird startup ecosystem thing. People will have a solution. People will have a product, right? Doesn't mean you can make a whole company out of it.
No, it doesn't. You also took part in something called Pacific Northwest Economic Region.
Yeah, that was this week.
That was like a trade import thing, right?
Not quite. So this is a really interesting group. They've been around for a really long time. It was actually considered like a transnational kind of like somewhat global thing. So that group, that Pacific Northwest Economic Region, that's considered to be like these 10 U.S. states and Canadian provinces here in the Pacific Northwest. And so every year they have this conference, but they also have different events and working groups throughout the year. It's primarily policy focused, so there's a lot of policymakers at the federal and state level, but also folks representing from different Canadian provinces. And so they had topics from housing to energy. Of course, the topic of the two topics that kind of loom large in the background of everything. Would you like to guess what they were? AI and tariffs.
Yeah, tariffs. Yeah, you're a speaker there, weren't you?
My fund partner was. He was on the quantum panel.
Okay.
There was also a space panel there.
Nice. So how do you find about all these networking things you go to?
Yeah, it's interesting. So sometimes we find them. Sometimes they find us. I was speaking with a recruiter who's worked in quantum and deep tech for like the last 5 or 6 years, and he was telling me that there's like only like 10,000 quantum people like in the whole wide world.
I don't know if I would believe that though. It seems like people way more. I'm not saying like millions and millions, but man, 10,000, that seems like pretty small.
Trust me, in his line of work, he has been looking high and low for more.
Yeah.
I used to be an IT recruiter myself, so I know what he means about the database and all of that. And then once again, this is like 10,000 people across like all these different disciplines, so it actually gets fragmented even further, because some are in research and some are in clean rooms, and some are actually more aligned to photonics, and like it gets into like these really kind of like that long tail of things. And so when it comes to these events and all that, if people are looking for quantum people, we've been so surprised how people can find us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Nardo, I jokingly say Nardo is like the Kevin Bacon of quantum. Like I've talked to people from probably like a dozen different countries, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I know your fund partner."
So how did you and your fund partner like come about doing business with each other?